Today, we confront a truth that central banks and governments desperately hope you never grasp. It is the core financial mechanism of the modern world. It is the real-time equation that guarantees your financial erosion. It is the unsettling answer to why, despite working harder and earning more, the purchasing power of your carefully saved dollars relentlessly dwindles. The equation is this: your savings must die so the state's debt may live. This is not hyperbole. It is not a conspiracy theory. It is the logical, structural conclusion of a financial system, the fiat system, engineered after 1971 to protect the issuer of currency, the government, at the direct and perpetual expense of the individual saver. We are living through history's greatest financial deception. For centuries, debt was a chain, a curse, and a tool of control. But today, debt is the very foundation of the global economy. And the method used to manage that debt, inflation, is nothing less than a hidden tax. A tax that bypasses Congress, sidesteps public debate, and is levied directly against the prudent, the working class, and the fixed-income earner. In this deep dive, we will dissect the three deadly mechanisms that constitute this hidden equation: the structural deficit, the debt monetization trick, and the Cantillon Effect, proving that the systematic devaluation of your dollar is not an accident, it is policy. Your belief in the sanctity of your savings is the last psychological barrier to understanding the current financial reality. Today, that barrier comes down.
To understand why your savings must perpetually shrink, we must start with the flaw that makes the entire system unstable. It is a flaw known as the Triffin Paradox. The dollar is the global reserve currency. This status, the exorbitant privilege, means every nation on Earth needs dollars to trade essential commodities like oil and to settle international balances. This creates automatic perpetual demand for the dollar. But the dollar's global role carries a fatal contradiction. Named after Belgian-American economist Robert Triffin, the paradox states that for the United States dollar to remain the world's reserve currency, the U.S. Treasury must supply enough dollars to the global system to finance ever-expanding global trade. How does the U.S. supply trillions of dollars to the rest of the world? By running consistent and massive trade deficits. The U.S. must perpetually import more than it exports, sending vast amounts of dollars abroad to pay the difference. This looks like a disadvantage on paper, but it is the supply requirement for maintaining reserve status. In the short term, this brilliantly oils the global gears. The world gets the liquidity it needs, and global commerce flourishes. But in the long term, it guarantees the dollar's own destruction. The fatal contradiction: the more dollars the U.S. is required to push abroad to satisfy global supply, the more fragile the currency's credibility becomes, destroying confidence. Why? Because the supply of dollars circulating globally eventually vastly exceeds the underlying assets or the capacity of the U.S. economy to support them. The system demands both confidence and supply, and over time, these demands become mutually exclusive. The dollar must sacrifice the health of its own economy by running massive debts to remain the world's reserve currency. This structural suicide was baked in when President Nixon severed the dollar's link to gold in 1971. The dollar became pure fiat currency, backed only by government decree. The petrodollar system, immediately struck with Saudi Arabia, provided a temporary fix by forcing global energy trade into dollars, but it only amplified the Triffin paradox. The constant need to supply dollars means the U.S. has been forced into a state of permanent structural deficit. We are now living with a $34 trillion national debt, a mountain that grows daily. The interest payments alone are astronomical, consuming nearly $1 trillion annually and outstripping critical spending on defense and education. This mountain of debt can never be repaid with honest money. It is mathematically impossible. Therefore, the state must rely on the second mechanism of the hidden equation, debt monetization.
The state has a debt problem of historic proportions. But rather than face the politically ruinous choice of slashing spending or imposing massive taxes on the powerful, they employ a subtle financial trick to finance the deficit: debt monetization, or the bond trick. Here is how the trick works, stripping away the central banking jargon. When the U.S. government runs a deficit, meaning it spends more than it takes in through taxes, it must cover that gap by borrowing. It does this by issuing U.S. Treasury bonds, basically an IOU, promising to repay the money with interest. Historically, these bonds were bought by savers, foreign governments, and pension funds. But today, the debt mountain is so colossal that traditional buyers often hesitate. The U.S. has a spending addiction, and the bond market, the traditional source of financing, cannot keep up without demanding crippling interest rates that would instantly implode the economy. Enter the Federal Reserve. When the Fed engages in what is known as quantitative easing, QE, the digital creation of new money, it steps in as the buyer of last resort. The Treasury issues the bond to cover the spending, and the Fed digitally creates new dollars out of thin air to purchase that bond. This action has two devastating effects on your savings. First, it is the modern debasement. This process is identical in economic function to the Roman emperors debasing the denarius coin by chipping away the silver and substituting cheap copper. The emperor was essentially printing money by reducing the silver content to pay the legions. The modern central bank performs the same trick, substituting an electrical impulse, digital money, for gold or production, effectively financing the state's massive deficits with currency that has no physical cost. The constraint of gold is gone. The constraint of production is bypassed. The state is now free to borrow and print at will, limited only by the world's continued trust, a trust that is rapidly eroding.
Second, it fuels the inflationary tax. This massive, instantaneous expansion of the money supply, creating digital trillions to buy debt, is not free. The cost is externalized onto the public through inflation. Inflation is the cost of monetary debasement. It is the silent tax that governments use to erode the real value of their colossal debts. Think about it. If the government borrows $1 today and devalues that dollar by 10% next year through inflation, they only have to repay 90 cents in real purchasing power. The government, the world's biggest debtor, benefits immediately. And who pays the other 10 cents? You do. The person who absorbs that cost is the prudent saver, the fixed-wage worker, and a pensioner. Every single year since the Nixon shock, the dollar has lost purchasing power. Since 1971, the dollar has lost over 85% of its original value. This is not an accident. This is the calculated structural theft required to keep the debt-dependent state functional. The final and most insidious mechanism of this transfer is the Cantillon Effect, which ensures that this theft is systematically executed from the bottom up, guaranteeing wealth concentration.
If the government prints money to pay debt, why doesn't everyone's wallet immediately feel 10% emptier? Because the new money doesn't enter the economy all at once. It enters through a single, privileged channel, and this delay is the key to the entire wealth transfer. The Cantillon Effect, named after 18th century economist Richard Cantillon, describes what happens when new money is injected into an economy. The first recipients of that money benefit disproportionately, while the last recipients suffer the most. Step 1. The elite receive the new money. When the Federal Reserve creates digital trillions, that money does not go to your checking account. It flows directly to the institutions involved in the bond markets: primary dealers, investment banks, large corporations, and the wealthiest asset owners. These are the financial elite. Step 2. Asset price inflation. The elite are the first recipients. They receive the new money when its purchasing power is still high before the overall price level has adjusted. What did they do with it? They acquire appreciating assets, stocks, real estate, fine art, and commodities. This massive inflow of liquidity causes asset price inflation. The prices of houses and stocks soar, making the rich rapidly richer. They use cheap credit to acquire real wealth. Step 3. The trickle-down and soaring prices. Only after the elite have spent the money does it begin to trickle down into the broader economy. By the time this massive flood of currency reaches the working class in the form of slightly increased wages or jobs, the prices for essential goods and services, food, rent, energy, have already soared, driven up by the earlier spending. The working person receives the money, wages, only to find that the price of their survival, rent, and groceries has already skyrocketed. This process ensures a relentless upward transfer of wealth. The elite receive the wealth, low-cost money, and acquire real assets. The savers and workers receive the inflation, devalued money, and absorb the rising cost of living. Your prudence is punished. Your decision to save diligently is systematically undermined by a system designed to extract that stored labor. The government's debt shrinks in real terms, and the wealth of the financial elite is amplified through asset inflation. The working class pays the bill for the structural deficit. The hidden equation is now complete. It is the inescapable cycle of the fiat system. Triffin Paradox, debt requirement, debt monetization, bond trick, Cantillon Effect, wealth transfer via inflation. This mechanism is not a malfunction. It is the fundamental, calculated policy necessary to keep the entire $34 trillion debt-dependent state functioning. The death of your savings is the cost of maintaining the illusion of stability and solvency. History provides terrifying echoes. The Roman Empire did the same trick when it debased the denarius. Spanish kings did the same when they inflated away their silver inflows. Every single fiat currency empire has followed this exact blueprint. Today, the scale of global debt stands north of $300 trillion. That mountain is mathematically impossible to repay without either outright default or, more likely, a continuation of this insidious inflation. The ultimate irony is that the state requires your savings to shrink for its debt to survive. Yet it simultaneously relies on your faith in the dollar to continue the trick. The question is no longer whether your dollar will lose value. Since 1971, it has lost value every single year by design. The question is, will you continue to be the product that the system profits from? Financial freedom in this era requires a radical shift in thinking. Do not confuse the illusion of stability with real value. Assets that can be printed away, paper promises and digital numbers, are the ones destined to pay the state's debt. Assets that cannot be printed away, tangible assets, productive skills, and resilient community networks are the only true hedge against this systemic deception. Do not be crushed by history. Learn from its clearest warnings. If you recognize the chains and want to learn how to secure your financial destiny, hit subscribe to the Financial Coin Historian now. We will continue to decode the failures of empires to secure your future.